Sometimes you hear a phrase, and nothing happens. You nod, forget, move on, and sometimes you hear it, and it becomes so quiet inside, as if someone pressed pause. You don't immediately understand why. You just feel, this is something important. Like you were caught off guard, not externally, but deeper. I was 45 when I heard such a phrase. It was said by a woman who was 85 at the time. It wasn't on a stage, not in a book, not in a motivational speech. She simply uttered it, calmly, without looking at anyone, as if saying it to herself, or to someone she had been waiting for a long time. Since then, I can't forget, because from the moment I heard it, everything started to change, not sharply, not loudly, just the question itself began to sound different. What am I actually waiting for? Today I will tell you exactly what she said, and if you listen to the end, it is quite possible that at some point it will also become quieter inside you, but already for a different reason. If you feel that there is something in these words that touches your life as well, you can subscribe to the channel. I speak here exactly like this, without noise, without haste, for real. Maybe you will find something else important in the following stories. It was one of those evenings when nothing seemed to foreshadow revelations or special events. I arrived in a small town at the invitation of a friend who organized meetings in the local library, something like a memory club. Older people gathered once a month to share stories, to talk about what had been and how it all sounds in them now. I agreed almost automatically, without a plan, without expectations, just to be, to listen. To, perhaps, remind myself that time is not only hours and calendars, but also faces and smells and voices that remain inside us for a long time. The room was simple. An old reading room, wooden shelves along the walls, a kettle on the back table, soft, slightly dusty light from lamps that seemed to remember the days when the internet was still science fiction. The people who gathered were ordinary. Gray heads, someone with a cane, someone with a warm blanket on their knees, someone with such a face in which there was no longer any fuss. There were no posers, no teachers of life. Only people who came to sit together on a Friday evening. I remember someone, a man, spoke first, told about his service, about the road that was built in 68th. Someone shared memories of the first television, someone about how in their youth they secretly smoked by the pier. It was cute, funny, almost cozy. Like an old radio broadcast that you listen to in the kitchen, not because you need information, but because there is warmth in it. And then she started talking. I didn't know who she was, just an elderly woman sitting closest to the window. Her name was Edith. It seems she was 85. She was dressed very simply. A gray cardigan with worn sleeves, a dark skirt, an old brooch on the collar, not shiny, but as if with a history. Her hair was neatly gathered, without excessive care, rather habitually, and there was something transparent in her, not in the sense of weakness, but in the sense of the absence of the superfluous, as if everything superficial had already gone, only what really belonged to her remained. She didn't make pompous gestures, didn't try to attract attention. On the contrary, it felt like she was only speaking because someone in the room silently asked a question, and she finally decided to answer. When she began to speak, the room became a little quieter, not because it was the moment, but because there was something almost kindred in her voice, weariness that doesn't complain, experience that doesn't boast. She looked out the window, then slightly to the side, as if remembering not an event, but a feeling, and said, "I spent most of my life waiting to be less afraid." And then I realized I was waiting for something that doesn't exist. She didn't raise her eyes, didn't pause, didn't emphasize the significance of her words, simply uttered them, evenly, calmly, as if speaking to herself. And there was something so real in that I literally felt something inside me shift. No one in the hall laughed, no one applauded, just that very silence came, which is not from emptiness, but from too great a meaning. Do you know that one? When you don't know what to say, not because you didn't understand, but because suddenly it became very clear. I sat and looked at her. She didn't explain her phrase, didn't comment, didn't expand into a lecture. She just released it into space, like a seed, and allowed everyone to hear something of their own in it. And since then I carry this with me, not as a quote, not as a lesson that is written in a diary next to plans for the week, but as a feeling that returns in the most unexpected moments, when you stand by the window, not knowing why you woke up earlier than usual. When you look at the phone screen and can't bring yourself to press call. When you walk down the street and it suddenly rolls over you. This is not just a day, it's another day, and you're still waiting for something. At first I tried to understand what exactly touched me so deeply in her words. She didn't say anything that couldn't be found on a postcard or in a self-help book. The words themselves were simple, but it wasn't about them. It was about how she said it, calmly, without struggle, without drama. Like a person who no longer hopes that someday the day will come when they will wake up and suddenly become fearless, confident, perfect. Like a person who just accepted that to live doesn't mean waiting for when it won't be scary. It means living, even if it's scary. And the more I thought about it, the clearer I understood. I'm also waiting, only unconsciously. I'm waiting for the excitement to disappear before starting something new. When everything falls into place, and you can move forward without hesitation. I'm waiting for that very day to come, ideal, clear, without doubts, when everything will become simple, and then I'll start, and then I'll say it, and then I'll dare. But the day doesn't come. Because it doesn't exist, because, as Edith said, we often wait for something that isn't, and never was, not because there is something wrong with us, but because fear is part of the path, not an obstacle on it. We think, the anxiety will go away, and then I will live. But life is already going on, with anxiety, with silence, with uncertainty. With all this together, I began to remember how much I had put off in my life only because I didn't feel ready enough. How many conversations didn't start, how many cities I didn't see, how many feelings I didn't acknowledge. I was waiting, and while I was waiting, a lot simply passed by. Since then, when I feel that familiar inner voice again, the one that says, wait, it's not time yet, I catch myself thinking that it's just him again. That same false guard who still hopes that one day there will be a day without fear. And then I tell myself, yes, it's scary. But that's not a reason to stop. It's just air. It's like that now. Sometimes I think, how many people around us continue to wait for peaceful relationships, for inspiration, the perfect moment for change. But life doesn't give perfect moments. It only gives real ones. Not always convenient, not always logical, but always the only ones we have. I don't know how much time I have left, but I know for sure. I no longer want to waste it waiting for the non-existent. This doesn't mean that I have become fearless. It means that I have stopped believing that courage is the absence of fear. It is simply the willingness to live next to it, not to turn away, not to hold your breath, but to go, like Edith, evenly, quietly, and just for real. If you recognize yourself in these things, if you also have pauses that last for years, give it a like, not because you have to, but because perhaps this conversation is not only for you. Maybe someone else needs it very much right now. Since then, I often think, how much in our lives remains in standby mode, as if there is some internal pause button that we pressed a long time ago and forgot that it can be released. We wait for the noise to settle down, for confidence to accumulate, for fear to pass. We wait for someone to call us, approve us, say, now you can. Only no one comes, and fear doesn't go away. He just lives nearby. And perhaps the only thing we can do is to stop making him the main one. When I remember Edith, I realize true wisdom is not in perfect solutions, and not in getting rid of all doubts. True wisdom is when you no longer wait, neither from yourself, nor from life, nor from time. This is a very quiet knowledge. It is not shouted. It is not boasted about. It is simply carried with you, like a flashlight in your pocket. Sometimes it lights up when it's dark, and sometimes you just know that you have it, and that's enough to move on. And now I want to ask you, very simply, without introduction, and what are you still waiting for? Is there something in you, a thought, a decision, a conversation, an action, that you keep putting off until later? You know it's important, maybe for a long time, but you're still waiting. For the moment, for clarity, for permission, for strength. You don't have to answer immediately. Just ask yourself this question. And if you want, write. I really read it. I'm interested because every time someone shares, it becomes a little easier, not only for them, but also for others who were silent. And if this video left something in you, leave a sign, like comment, subscribe, call it what you want. Let it not be for the algorithm, but as a quiet yes to what resonated. We'll talk more, but now let there be silence.